What is going on, fam? Thank you very much for coming back to this channel. In today's segment, we're going to be talking about what mental health provider you should see. Now, if you haven't looked at my previous videos, I am an advocate for removing the mental health stigma. If you don't already know, if this is your first time watching my video, I have been diagnosed with bipolar 1 disorder on the severe end of the spectrum with mixed mania and psychotic features. So if it ever gets out of hand, I can become delusional, paranoid, and psychotic. Fortunately, because I have immersed myself in receiving adequate mental health and also knowing my triggers and all this stuff, it has allowed me to be able to create content to you on a much more strategic, concise level. I will preface that I am not as elevated as my previous videos, but if I do tend to get off topic, I am slightly hypomanic, but I'm more hyperactive. If you haven't looked at my past videos, I have been an advocate for mind over meds, know when drugs are necessary, when alternatives are better, and when to let your body heal on its own. I am a huge advocate for you knowing when and when not to use medication. Majority of you are going to your primary care physician, your family nurse practitioner, or your physician's assistant for mental health treatment. You may be getting Lexapro, Zoloft, Xanax, ADHD medication, but the problem is that you're not really treating the problem. Now, this is not to say that your primary care physician is not qualified to give those medications, but it's not necessarily their training. They're not exclusively trained to handle that. So I want to give you a little perspective on what you should do if you're getting any kind of Adderall or Xanax or antidepressant like Lexapro or Zoloft, because I don't want you to go back into the same state that I did. To give you a little premise of what happened to me, I was suffering from high levels of anxiety, and my family nurse practitioner, who's actually very amazing, by the way, he gave me Effexor because in theory, when he gave me this anxiety checklist, I ranked very high, but that's all it was a checklist. It wasn't like if anything, it was more of a screener, and it wasn't an in-depth evaluation. So he said, hey, I hear off-label we can use Effexor to treat this anxiety problem if you don't want to be put on Xanax, because the propranolol, which is a blood pressure medicine, wasn't working. In essence, because I was undiagnosed bipolar at the time, it induced me into a very uncomfortable manic state, and I was very delusional, very paranoid, and actively psychotic because I was suffering from auditory hallucinations due to a antidepressant SNRI medication that I was taking. Not only that, the withdrawal symptoms were very, very profound, and it made me very uncomfortable. Nonetheless, fortunately, I got everything intact, but I want to give you a little information on how you would start the process to receive mental health treatment. So for which clinicians you should see is really dependent on what your problem is. If we're going to put everything mind over meds, this book that you'll be able to get down below through an Amazon link, yes, it's affiliate, this is going to be everything towards psychiatry, and psychiatry is medication management therapy. You're looking at antidepressants, you're looking at antipsychotics, you're looking at anticonvulsants, you're looking at sleep meds, anything that's related to your mental health, we're going to be looking at mind over meds. Mind over meds, the clinicians you should see on the medication side, that's going to be from a psychiatrist, which is a MD or DO. It could also be an advanced psychiatric nurse practitioner. It's essentially a nurse practitioner who has psychiatric training. And it can also be a physician's assistant. Those are the providers that you're going to look into. Only caveat is that your insurance may not cover psychiatric needs, or the psychiatrist or whatever psychiatric professional you see may not take insurance. That's the only problem, is it's very expensive, or it can be depending on where you are. So one of the things that you need to look at is if you get a physician's assistant, you will not pay as much as a medical doctor. But that's the problem, is that, in my opinion, psychiatrists are really treating symptoms. They don't really have a diagnosis. And from my experience, I don't believe a psychiatrist should diagnose somebody with a mental health disorder, especially something for that's profound like bipolar disorder that can closely mirror something like borderline personality disorder. They're almost like fraternal sisters. It can be either or. So the thing you should actually do is look for an actual mental health provider, but not related to medication management. If I could start back at ground zero, the first thing that I would do is go get a psychological evaluation done by a psychologist. Not a psychiatrist, a psychologist. A psychologist is somebody who has a PhD or PsyD in psychology. They're going to do an examination where they're going to check your executive functioning, how do you plan, prioritize, and organize information, your auditory processing, your attention. They're going to look at your IQ, academic standing. They may look at your mood and personality. They may also check for autism or social development. They may also look at observational checklists, kind of like your standard behavior patterns. As a side note, to gather data, whether this is from a friend, family member, husband, spouse, whatever the case may be, just to see how someone else's point of view is looking in. And then we do a projective testing such as a Rorschach. In that sense, a psychologist would be the first step that I would go to if you really need to figure out what's going on with you mentally. Imagine it like you're going to your PCP for blood work and you need to figure out if you have diabetes. That would be the thing, is you need to go to a psychologist to see if you have major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, anything like that. That's kind of what the mirror is. Psychologist is the one who's going to be able to pinpoint what you have, in my opinion, of course. But then if we dive a little bit further down the spectrum, you also have a new provider called LPAs. LPAs are licensed psychological associates. They are a step down between licensed psychologists, so they can almost do what a psychologist does. Most of them actually have doctoral degrees, but you need at least a master's degree. That is just really dependent on really what they can offer to you. Most of the time, LPAs can do independent practice, but currently they're going to be more with a psychologist just because of it being so new to the nation as a whole, a licensed psychological associate. An LMFT is a licensed marriage and family therapist who can have a doctoral degree, but they generally need a master's degree. You can also get help from a licensed professional counselor who can have a doctoral degree, but they most likely just need a master's degree. Does it really matter who you see? Well, that is a question. So let me kind of break this down a little bit further. It really depends on what kind of therapy you're looking for and whatever that mental health provider can provide. Some psychologists just do therapy. Some LPAs just do psychological testing. LPCs, if they're going to do testing, they need to practice under a psychologist. An LMFT, if they're just doing couples therapy, that's all they need. And they don't really do psychological testing. There's also a licensed clinical social worker or a licensed master's level social worker. They don't really do testing either. So most of the time, LMFTs and social workers are going to do family therapy and couples therapy generally, or they'll do like biofeedback. Most of the time, that's what their license pushes them towards. On the other hand, an LPC and an LPA are going to be assistants to a psychologist to do psychological testing. And with that being said, an LPC is qualified if they have the training to do couples and family therapy. It just really depends on their training. An LPA, again, they can do marriage and family therapy if they're qualified and trained to do so. So it just really depends on what the provider's experience and training is and their confidence level. Because a psychologist, if they really wanted to, they could do biofeedback, they could do couples therapy, family therapy, individual therapy, play therapy. They could do substance abuse. They could do psychological testing. They could do neuropsychological testing. It just really depends on the provider's experience. So before you try to put, you need a PhD in order to treat me, don't let that hold you back. I would be upfront, find a mental health provider, ask them what their experience is, what their comfort level is. And again, it's also based on your comfort level of, did you really vibe with this provider? If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit that follow button. Make sure you follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I'm now Pinterest, Tumblr, LinkedIn, and TikTok. Until next time, guys, stay tuned. Take care.